Good afternoon and welcome to the afternoon session of the examination into the hearings into the examination of Northampton local plan. The session is now open. And I also welcome those people that are watching online, and although we've got a lot of the same participants that we had this morning, I still think for the benefits of those watching online, it's worthwhile that people introduce themselves again. I'm Mark Sturgis. I'm one of the inspectors, along with my colleague Philip Lewis, appointed by the Secretary of State to conduct the examination into the Northampton Part 2 local plan. And if we can just run round the table and ask the council first, who's here and who will be talking for them.
Okay, I'm Noreen Banks, Planning Policy Team Leader for West Northamptonshire Council, Northampton area.
Simon Berkey, Legal Support.
Amanda Jenkins, West Northamptonshire.
Paul Everard, Planning Policy and Heritage Manager, West Northamptonshire.
And Catherine Sidney from LUC carried out the Habitats Regulation Assessment on behalf of the Council. I'm here with my colleague John Pearson, who undertook the sustainability appraisal.
Ben Aspinall Birdie, Viability Support of the Council.
Chris Ragg, Transportation Development Manager at the Council.
Richard Wood, Interim Head of Planning and Climate Change Policy at the Council. John Hopkins, Senior Associate at Stantec UK Limited, supporting Homes England on the green side.
Rachel Manning, Senior Associate at Stantec, supporting Homes England in relation to ecology for the green and heritage site.
Afternoon, Adwal Owen, Legal Officer, Assistant Partner, and representing Homes England this afternoon.
I'm Mark White, Senior Manager, Planning and Lighting for Homes England.
Thank you for that. Can I just remind people to make sure your phones are switched off so there's no interruptions to the session this afternoon. And on that note, I will move into the matter this afternoon, which is housing allocations. And the issue is, are the proposed housing allocations justified, effective and consistent with national policy? So the first set of questions relates to Policy 39, which is Northampton Railway Station. And there are two allocations there, that's LA 0288 and then the rail freight, and the adjoining site LL 0333. So if I can come to the council first and just ask the council to help me with the first question, which is question 61. Is the proposed allocation of railway land for redevelopment consistent with paragraph 104 of the framework, and is it justified in terms of provision of sustainable freight and passenger transport?
Okay. First of all, the sites were promoted by Network Rail, and they have been supportive of these allocations throughout the plan preparation process. Network Rail and will continue to be involved in discussions with the authority with regards to delivering generation in the redevelopment of the Northampton Railway Station theme. This modern city will continue to cater for rail passengers and also provide opportunity to travel, taxis, walking. Part of the future wider Northampton Station redevelopment, it is noted that the rail freight operation basis
Characterised with network rather breached.
are ongoing, but there's no further information than that at this stage.
And so, just following through on that, then there's no timetable for planning application on this site, for instance.
There is there's a couple of things. There is first of all, there's a statement of common ground that's been signed by Network Rail. There's a couple actually. It's exam 21 and exam 22. Secondly, an agreement between the offices from Network Rail, the developer, and West Northamptonshire Council has actually been reached, and a recommendation to proceed with the first stage, which is the delivery of a new multi-storey car park at the station, is being taken to Cabinet this December. If this happens, this will unlock the wider station site, enabling the rest of the developments to take place. Network Rail have also submitted a pre-application for the proposed development of the site, comprising the new multi-storey car park, as well as a mixed-use scheme for retail, leisure, and 269 apartments. And they gave us permission to say that.
When was the pre-application submitted?
I can check on that.
Thank you. Can I now come to other people in the room? Are there any people who have got any reaction to what the councillor said? Okay, thank you. I will move on. In terms of question 62 then, which is to do with the recommendations of the Northampton Heritage Impact Assessment, what is the council's assessment then of how effective Policy 39 would be in conserving and enhancing the historic environment?
The key recommendation contained in the HIA, the Heritage Impact Assessment, relates to archaeology. We did include this recommendation in paragraph 13.9 of the plan, but not in policy. Following the consultation to the proposed round 2, proposed division round 2, Historic England did make comments on the fact that we did not include the reference to archaeology in policy 39. They've also recommended some wording changes to improve the policy. We have taken those comments on board, and we have suggested a proposed main modification to that effect, which is modification 35.
Thank you. And in terms of the question 63, you may well have answered some of this in terms of the deliverability and development and the site being developable. So I'm not going to pursue that anymore, just simply because I think I've got the information I need there, apart from getting some information when the pre-app was submitted.
I will let you know, yes.
Thank you. And then finally, in terms of this, we've got question 64 about is it clear from the policy how the decision makers should react to the proposal in respect to the existing sewerage on the site?
Yes, we had a comment back from England Water who suggested that an additional bullet point be added to the policy to ensure that this issue of foul drainage infrastructure is addressed. We have taken that on board and included that as a proposed main modification 36. In addition, policy 7 also stipulates that for all major development, suitable access must be supplied for drainage infrastructure.
And finally then, this one, could you take me through the main modifications as proposed in terms of the site?
The main modification 35 relates to the reference to archaeology, and some wording changes to bullet point 1. Modification 36 relates to an additional reference to the safeguarding of suitable access for the maintenance of foul drainage infrastructure.
Thank you. Is there any other points?
Brief point, you mentioned the Council's Cabinet is considering that proposal. It would be helpful just to get a note of the outcome of that.
Okay.
in due course, please. Provide that via the progress.
Thank you. I'll now move on to the next set of questions, which relates to policy 41, which is the green at Great Mountain, which the reference is LAA 1098. We did have some discussions about this site at the opening yesterday, but some of the detailed questions, especially around the HRA, we said would lead to this session. So, as the question 66 shows, we will concentrate on that. Obviously, I've seen the statements of common ground that have been issued, and that one obviously, or the statement of common ground there, does show a lot more detail, especially in terms of things like the sound and the buffer zone between the proposed allocation and Great Howden. So I've got some questions around the sound and, in particular as well, the functionally linked land, which obviously goes to the heart of whether the site can be delivered in terms of the HRA. So I suppose we've also got the council whose policy it is, because it's in their plan, but we've also got the promoters around the site as well. But I will follow the convention coming to the council first, and then see if the promoters then can add to what's been said. So in terms of the proposed sound, it's clear from the representations that Natural England want to be involved in the sound. So in terms of what's in the written statements and the statements of common ground, to what extent have Natural England been involved in those discussions and that have resulted in that layout that's now been submitted?
Yeah, at this point, can I refer you to my colleague Amanda Jacobs?
So the Council of West Northamptonshire and Homes England and Natural England have sat round the table and we've discussed the sound, and obviously it's gone into the statement of common ground, which is 7. We've been party to the discretionary advice service that Homes England have sought from Natural England, and we will continue to be moving forward. So we have discussed the sort of initial parameters of the sound, but they aren't quite fixed yet. But as you'll be aware, Homes England have submitted some sort of pilot sketches of what the sound may look like, and obviously it needs to be sort of discussed further with Natural England. It's an ongoing process, but yeah, the council has been involved with the process to date with regard to the sound.
Has Natural England been involved in the discussions which led to production of the diagram, the map, the plan that's in the written statement, in particular with things like off-lead dog walking areas and that sort of thing? Again, it's making sure that those would satisfy the HRA in terms of recreational disturbance to the SPA and perhaps diverting pressures away from it.
I mean, they have been involved in terms of putting forward these available criteria that needs to be met. And I'll probably pass over to Arwell from David Rock, if that's okay. To provide more detail.
Certainly, but that's appropriate. Thanks.
Just to put a little bit more flesh on that, just to explain the design discretionary advice service that we've been through and we've got to on that. Briefly, by way of background, submission that we have from Homes England incorporates not only dealing with the local planning examination, but also various bits of technical work that have informed the work that you see before you, and we'll come to that in due course. In terms of the advice service, as the council have said, we've had joint meetings previously. The plans that we've shared as part of the hearing statements have now gone to Natural England, but they only went very recently, in the last week or so. It's also the first time that the council have seen them, so they're the culmination of our work collectively on behalf of Homes England. That said, Natural England of course have guidelines. I think they refer in there, paragraph 22 of their statement, to the updated guidelines, which we've had regard to, and we have, to our knowledge, addressed all of those matters in the August update. I don't think there's anything that significantly different in those. So the advice service that we have with Natural England will now give them the opportunity to respond to us on those emerging designs, profit reviews, and obviously from that process we would then look to refine those proposals as required, working with the council equally, and those would then ultimately culminate in a planning application typically.
Okay, so in terms of what Natural England said in their pardon me, in terms of what Natural England said in their written statement, the discretionary advice service, that will be the way that Natural England is involved in the design and acceptability of the SAN.
That's right. I mean, we had discussed SAN and the principles, and I think the statement from Natural England sets out that they're waiting to see those, but they do set out a number of points of principles of agreement. Those reflect the statement of common ground. So that is the process that we normally go through, although quite often those things actually only happen as part of a planning application. So Homes England are choosing to act early on that in advance of the planning application to offer certainty to all parties.
Yeah, and again, from the point of view of this examination, I will say it, but we've got to look at the deliverability of the proposals, and obviously the acceptability of the HRA goes to heart of whether the green at Great Home would be deliverable. I have some questions which I'm not going to ask on the overwintering bird surveys, which I think we covered quite extensively yesterday, and thank you for that. In terms of functionally linked land, and I'll come to the council first on this because it's a different point. How feasible is it that the suggestion from Homes England that they could purchase further land to compensate for the loss of functionally linked land, if that is what it proves to be, can be purchased? And I suppose the other question is there any land in mind that could substitute for the loss of these sites if they prove to be functionally linked land? I'll start with the council, but if you would.
Yeah, we don't have the answer, I don't think, to that. I don't know if Homes England.
Thank you. It's just picking that up from the written statement.
Of course. I'm happy to deal with it at a high level. Obviously, if there are technical questions, I'll pass those through to Rachel, if I may. The approach here, just to provide a little bit of context again, the notion of the site being potentially functionally linked land was raised in the DAS process originally, and the in-principle approach to mitigation was discussed in that process. So that's where it stems from, and that's why we have, if you like, degrees of confidence in whether it's something that we could accommodate or not. Typically, there are two main approaches. The main consideration, again, I will hand over if you need me to. The primary consideration is to ensure that there is suitable mitigation, and that doesn't necessarily require acquisition of land, although that is one way of doing it. The other approach is effectively to engage in management agreements, and I believe, I may hand over Rachel, actually some of that is covered in the HRA in terms of certain of the plans the approach. So I think it's a potential two-stage process. One is to secure management of existing land that performs a function and either to safeguard that or to improve it, and thereby ensuring the ongoing function of that land. Or secondly, to acquire and bring it up to standard. So that at a high level, as I say, if you require more detail.
Yeah, I've got to just drill into that a little bit. In terms of the management agreements, have you got examples of where that was done elsewhere, and how long do these management agreements typically last for? And without going into too much detail, what they cover typically?
I'm not a planning expert, but I believe they could be part of Section 106. There's also an allowance under the NERC Act agreement for legal management agreements to be undertaken with landowners. I've had previous experience with Homes England entering into those such agreements if required for a site in Dover. Whereby that agreement gave certainty to delivery of bat mitigation in advance of a planning application, if that mechanism therefore wasn't available. But I would believe that there would be a legal agreement essentially between Homes England and the landowner that would secure a certain type of management for that land, giving it that long-term management that Natural England require for mitigation, and that legal agreement would provide the mechanism essentially to deliver that over that long-term period.
Thank you for that. Again, just to delve a bit deeper into that. Obviously, we're still in the position where the bird survey, or when new bird surveys are being carried out. But it was a question I posed right at the start. Have you got any land in mind that could function as functionally linked land should the site be identified as that?
Homes England haven't acquired land for that purpose as yet.
No,
the matter is under discussion. The HRA does include, and is appended to it, there are plans which I'll need to check on the reference. Figure 5.1, which identifies quite a wide extent of geography and identifies the function of that land relative to the SPA. It may well be that LUC want to come in and correct any errors of my description of that. But effectively what that does is set out how various bits of land perform. So that's the first aspect, is to draw that one. Is the opportunity for, if there are deficiencies or opportunities to improve on management for that land, to either be safeguarded over a long period if it is not already, or to improve its management to perform a better function. That's always the first option, because it effectively cascades rather than seeking to acquire new land. That said, as the government's agency for development and regeneration, Homes England has fairly extensive experience of acquiring land, and is able to do so on sensible terms, given its setup. So the idea of acquiring land, as you'll see, as is referenced in our statements, land related to this scheme has already been acquired in terms of Hardingstone Lodge, for example. So since the application being made, that has been brought into the site. We'll discuss that later. But that demonstrates their ability to move quickly to acquire land. Obviously they have funds available to do that. So as an agency charged by government to facilitate development, it's something that's not foreign to them, and they're able to do so.
So it would be feasible then to...
It would be, yes.
And again, just forgive me if I'm not very clear, that in terms of the management agreement, you talked about that being long term. What do we mean by long term, and what is long term?
Well, when in DAS advice from Natural England previously in relation to Sang to a different site, when kind of asked about long-term measures and what they mean by that, they often use the term in perpetuity, which doesn't have I don't think, a legal definition. Natural England have currently come back and indicated that's potentially an 80-year length. The Environment Act in biodiversity net gain, when you're securing an off-site, that is a 30-year period. So the term long term isn't actually, I think, defined in this case, and that would be part of our discretionary advice service discussions with Natural England and what they define to be long term in respect to this mitigation.
So looks like somewhere between 30 and 80 years.
I would expect so, yes.
Okay, thank you for that. Has the council got anything else you'd like to say on the HRA issue before I move on to other matters to do with the site?
No.
Fine, thank you for that. I want to move on to question 67, which is about the 6th and 7th bullet points of the policy, which refer to woodland and buffers, and as to whether that's clear how a decision maker should react to development proposals. In this regard, then, has would the decision maker know, for example, where the optimum sites for these features should be in order to achieve what they're seeking to do?
Can I just refer you back to my colleague Amanda, please?
We proposed for the modification here, main modification 52A, which would combine bullets points 2 and 7. So it would make it clear for the decision maker that this would occur in this would buffer the area that's indicated as a buffer zone or area of ecological enhancement on figure 19. Figure 20 related to policy 41. It's main modification 42A6. Merge and rework bullet points 2 and 7. A buffer is to be created in the area identified as ecological enhancement within figure 20 to ensure appropriate types of habitat are protected, enhanced and or created in line with other policies of this plan. Accessibility for recreation and a clear separation between the site and the village of Great Hampton.
Thanks, got that. Moving on then from, Homes England, would you like to?
I think the only thing I was, if it's useful, was just going to set out very briefly a bit more of the context of our commission and therefore how that's led to the evidence that you have before you. So I will deal with that briefly, sir. The commission from Homes England obviously culminates in the discussion today, effectively. But technical work has been commissioned, including transport, heritage, landscape, ecology, arboriculture and utilities, and all of that work has been drawn together to inform the concept master plan that we've presented and the perspectives. Those will now be used to inform conversations with the council and ultimately work towards a planning application, which would happen prior to disposal to the market, subject to allocation. And so the materials that you have do effectively provide our response to some of the questions that you've posed at the council, which is obviously in their end of the council in terms of how they make decisions, but what you have before you is how we would present information for that decision and our interpretation of that. And in particular, the figure 20 land, in our view, performs a number of functions, most obviously SAN, but also it does have heritage and ecology and landscape aspects as well. And so on a number of these questions, you've seen our evidence. We're comfortable that we understand what that means. The council, in fairness, hasn't seen the material that was appended to our hearings. They haven't formally seen that prior to the submission of our hearing, so it is new to them, and I would expect them to provide detailed comments on that. But it may well be that if they're reasonably comfortable that responds positively, that may be of use to you. So I think that I just wanted to provide that context to explain what that work is, and certainly from the work that we've done, there are modifications proposed. Those help steer the decision making on that. We have to be aware, of course, that in planning, anyone may come along, but from our perspective, from our perspective, we understand what the council is doing there. We're comfortable that those are things that can be addressed through a subsequent planning application.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Lewis, would you?
Yeah, just a few things have occurred to me whilst listening to this about partly about how the site is located on the policies map. I understand that there's been a change in land ownership which affects the western part of the map. At the moment it excludes the proposed allocation, excludes Harkinson Lodge. Is that something that council needs to look at again in terms of the
I believe that is main modification 39B. So just to explain on that, it's appended to our hearing statement was the covering letter, and obviously plans can be provided if that is helpful. But Homes England have acquired outright the freehold of that land since the allocation was made, and so the proposition is that that land could be included in the allocation. There wouldn't be an uplift in the capacity of the site. But that is a change that has happened, and so Homes England now are, say, taking control of that land. So that's the context.
In terms of I'll call it the eastern parcel, the area of land that heads up towards Great Houghton, the northern section about where Dogfield Land, that is intended to be the open space and part of the sound.
Yes.
I pose the question, should we find this allocation in sound principle? Is there enough certainty that the sign will be provided in that area to actually include, to indicate that on the proposals map, to start setting out the parameters of the site and actually identifying that as being the location for the sign, with the rest of the site being effectively the area for building development? Because it says that, it refers to figure 20, but figure 20 isn't the policies map, it's effectively a diagram of the plan. And I think, would that be more effective, provided it's justified? And now that appears to be a position that is being moved towards, and there's still work to be done. No doubt we will give further consideration when we write an advisory letter. If we consider the site sound in principle, we want to think about that a bit more.
We can certainly see that it's been a sort of an iterative process that's gone on from the plan. So in the plan on figure 20, you've got ecological enhancements. That's moved on in the written statement to a much more detailed examination of how sound could fit on there. And then we've just heard from that it could also act as a buffer in terms of heritage and the effect on the conservation area. So it's really moving that forward and making sure that whether that could be shown on the proposals map.
Have in mind the representations made by a number of residents from Great Houghton, particularly expressing concern about coalescence.
Yeah.
Now, it's becoming apparent that that is not the intention of the council and the promoter. The council has set out in the plan that it's going to be done as an area of green undeveloped space. To make that more certain through the development plan, I think I would hope would provide some comfort and address some of the issues, not all of them, because Mr. Sturgis will have questions about those for residents of Great Houghton who are not here today, and so I'm very happy to put questions on their behalf. So we note that as a potential point.
One thing, if I may, sir, I think from our perspective, you've seen the material that we've submitted. That's in the public domain. As you will appreciate as inspectors, it's very difficult to row back from information that's in the public domain. I think the uncertainty is exactly where that boundary would lie. At this stage, Natural England have the illustrative material that have been provided. We don't have their view, and therefore there is the potential that that line might be somewhere else. And I think the council have set out a proposal that the master plan be submitted as part of the application for a separate discussion. But I think certainly as part of the same process, that will reveal exactly where that line sits. My nervousness is simply about degrees of flexibility as to exactly where
Yes.
something sits. So I think in principle we've shown Homes England is committed to that land performance, and it suits us to do it. It's on site, it's deliverable by us, and it's in our control. Do that, so there's no dispute about that in principle.
Fully
It's just the level of detail.
fully
at this
understand
stage.
that. We have to form a view on what the policy says in order to make it effective, and that is something that we're putting into the mix now. It's something we'll have to take away and consider further. But on the same issue, it would be helpful to have an indication as to the ratios that Natural England are looking at in terms of population created and hectares of space. There might be something to actually encapsulate within the policy criterion. Again, that would be information for the council to come through on that in order to provide some certainty as to what's being provided.
Can I comment on that? There's the SANG guidance, which is referenced by Natural England, Thames Basin and Heath, and there's also other SANG guidance around the country for other European sites, and some of them do go down the line of having a hectareage per number of people, residents, and some don't. So there's no particular SANG guidance for this particular European site, and Natural England has kind of earmarked us to look at the Thames Basin and Heath. But in the discretionary advice service, Natural England themselves said, although look at that and draw on that, that might not have specifics for our locality as well. So hence, we will be continuing our discussions with Natural England in relation to the sound design. I think at present there isn't a hectareage per number of people.
Yeah, that corresponds to my experience elsewhere, but I think
Yeah.
it would be helpful to have perhaps updated common ground with Natural England as to the position that would ultimately be reached, so it's clear as to what the parameters are, and ideally if that can then be encapsulated in the plan in some way for this site. So the view is going to have to be reached in terms of the habitats regulations on what is required. And there would need to be an agreement on the methodology in order that view can be reached, so that would be helpful.
And that might be the illustrative material that we've seen as part of this examination that you say we've just sent to Natural England. I mean, that will form the basis, I would imagine, of the discussions will lead to what Mr. Lewis is pushing towards. Thank you. Have the council got anything that would like to come back on?
So we'll give thought to the extent to which the policies map can reflect what we've been discussing. As far as figure 20 is concerned, I mean, it is part of the plan because, of course, it's referred to in policy 41, so it has development plan status in that sense. So the detail, I think, would have to stay on the development principles because it would be too small scale on the policies map, but it may be possible to show a buffer on the policies map. We'll give some thought to that.
Thank you. Again, that helps us in the developable and deliverable issue that we're looking at. In terms of other matters then to do with on Great Happy site, looking at question 68 now, I've obviously read the statements of common ground that have been produced in the written statements, and again these go to the deliverability of the site, if you like. There's mention of safe pedestrian routes, both between the Bracknells employment area and the transport routes along Bedford Road. Could I'll ask the council first, give indication of how that could be achieved?
Okay, well, the site is actually quite accessible because it's next door to the Bracknells employment area to the west, and Bedford Road itself is located just to the north, and both areas are served by buses. And there are also cycle and pedestrian routes connecting the Bracknells employment area and Bedford Road to the town centre, to Riverside Retail Park and beyond. So there are opportunities for the scheme to take advantage of the sustainable transport modes.
So, in terms of the site then, if we look at, say, the green, which obviously is the southern boundary of this site, after which it's called, are there bus routes on the green itself then? Is that the...
At this point, can I refer you to my colleague Chris,
At the moment, no, it's not a bus route, but as Homes England have said in their statement, the expectation from their discussion at the stagecoach is that the future service that will serve the south of Bracknell's sustainable urban extension could be extended into serve this site.
Okay, so in terms of the occupants of that potential site, then, they wouldn't have to walk up through Great Houghton Village to the Bedford Road to catch a bus, for instance. They'd be able to catch a bus on the green.
They'd be able to catch a bus within the development site. That would be the thing.
Okay, thanks.
I was just going to offer if I may take your attention and pass it down.
Go on.
So may.
Thank you. Just to let you know, sir, we've had initial discussions with Stagecoach, and just to repeat what Mr. Aggs just said, the Stagecoach would be willing to extend the services from the land south of Bracknell's into the development, as long as there is a obvious route, such that they don't have to reverse or go back on the same route. And this would actually add benefit to the local area. Bus services in their initial stages of development are notoriously hard to guarantee, and the continuing development at the Green would ensure a bigger patronage to ensure their long-term viability. If I could just pick up on the footpath and cycle path measures as well, land within the control of Homes England, we could use that to provide footway cycleway links into the Bracknell site, and partly through the same as well, which would assist in these sustainable connections. I think if I could just advise that the site itself holistically is well located, with both the existing and emerging development of Northampton in this area, to enable walking, cycling and public transport. Thank you.
Just carry on through on the transport route then. Transport routes. Sorry, Mr. Ragg, I missed your.
Thank you, sir. I was just going to add, reflecting on what Mr. Hopkins has said, is that actually one advantage is once you've got into Bracknell's, not only is an active travel route to Bracknell's itself, but it's also essentially the shortest route, if you look on the wider map, from this development into the town centre, the university, and those sort of things, and is likely to link to other improvements that we're going to be doing to the walking and cycling network. So, for example, the old Northampton to Bedford railway line, which passes along the river corridor, which actually is in the ownership of the council, is something we have plans to actually convert into an improved walking and cycling corridor. So it's likely, not only just taking it into Bracknell's as an active travel route, but that's likely to be probably the primary route into the town centre for active travel from this development.
And that, just so I'm clear, that disused railway line, is that the one that passes sort of to the north of Great Houghton? Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
The question I want to look at next really is the impact of the traffic on Great Houghton Village. So if you're accessing the site from the north, from I think it's the A428 Bedford Road, would all the traffic then come down through Great Houghton? And would that be one of the primary accesses to the site from the strategic road network?
Again, can I refer you to
Yeah.
Chris, please?
Certainly, yeah.
Thank you. I think where we're now seeing, obviously this site lies between Newport Pagnell and the Bedford Roads. Where we're now seeing the focus of this development sitting is much more on the Newport Pagnell Road end of things. So when we actually did the traffic modelling and analysis that's in the evidence base, one of the things I queried was the traffic heading almost from this side, avoiding the Bedford Road, because the Bedford Road was very busy. I think actually now where the focus of the development is, the traffic that's going towards the strategic road network would not tend to go through Great Houghton Village, because there are quicker routes. It probably is quicker for that traffic to go through the Bracknell Industrial Estate if it was heading on the A45 going east towards the Webbing direction or into the town centre. That's it was only people that, you know, if you were actually heading to Bedford or something like that, you'd be like, you know, you'd probably go down to a Greyhound village unless it was made difficult. But I don't think it's going to be the primary route out for this. And I think the designs in the illustrative master plan that Mr Hopkins might surely draw your attention to, you know, actually are tending to encourage that even further.
That's a nice segue into Mr Hopkins and England there. Thank you.
Seamless. Thank you. To follow on Mr Ragg's evidence, we have had some informal conversations with the operator of the model, and it certainly appears that the majority of the movement does go down towards Newport Pagnell Road. What we would also refer you to is the need for a site-specific transport assessment as part of this, because the modelling that has been undertaken by the authority is what we would expect to see at this stage of the process, but there are some finer details that would need to be considered as well, which may affect how traffic does move around here. And we would focus on the local area with validation and calibration on this. Part of the transport strategy could be a more flexible approach to understanding where where mitigation is required, so we can focus any expenditure in the right places as we move forward.
As Mr Lewis referred to earlier, one of the things we want to do is to ensure that we ask some questions around the concern of residents. And one of them was the concern of increased traffic through Great Houghton Village. So would it be possible then within that modelling and within the design of the scheme then to minimise physically the amount of traffic that would by necessity have to go through Great Houghton Village?
Might I carry on to
So,
do you want me to?
by all means, I'll come back to some general point afterwards.
In some of the information that we've shared, it's just showing that the connections to the green are very much focused towards the west and the south, and we have no aspirations or inclination, to be honest, to improve the links towards the southeast corner of the site leading into Great Houghton. If we do that and provide a direct access towards the east, then that movement is more likely to be encouraged. And so, as I say, most of our focus is towards the west.
Thank you for that. I suppose my next question on this is around the what we just talked about, and that is if you like, the focus of the traffic coming out onto the Newport Pagnell Road. I've seen a reference somewhere to perhaps some improvements to a strategic road network necessary on the Newport Pagnell Road. If that happens, could both council first, and I'll come to the other in a minute, just give me some idea of what improvements to the strategic roadwork network would be needed on the Newport Pagnell Road will accommodate this allocation.
Again, I'll come back to my colleague Chris.
I'm just rereading the traffic analysis, and I don't think actually we've particularly highlighted anything on the Newport Pagnell Road. And the Bedford Road we certainly did highlight the potential to need improvements there, and that's not just because of this; it's the cumulative effect of other developments on there and existing issues there. But the Newport Pagnell Road is already the impacts of those, particularly on getting towards the strategic road network, there's already significant improvements planned at the A45 junctions as part of the Northampton Growth Management Scheme and as part of the SUE as well, which go over and above what was in.
Is that the additional lanes at roundabouts and things like that is mentioned in that? Because I saw that, I think, mentioned in the context of this site as well.
If I may add to that, we have looked at the Newport Pagnell Road with reference to the transport assessment work which was submitted by NEC for the Hampton Green site, and with a manual appraisal of potential trip generation from this site. At this stage, it is only an initial review, and there are a series of junctions which may need some mitigation, following on and reflective of the proposals for the Hampton Green site. I think this does provide some opportunity to work together collaboratively. And the final part of this is obviously the works at the Queen Allen roundabout is subject to the NGMS, and that there is a West Northampton scheme which is in early stages of development, which is to accommodate movement strategically as well as from specific developments.
Thank you. Is there anything else the council would like to say, Mr. Ragg? Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
I'm just thinking about where the intention of the scheme is going. Concerns being expressed about how development may affect the green, and at the moment it's largely a single track road, isn't it? And is there any intention or any necessity to actually do any works to that if development can largely be accessed from the new Bagwell Road? And if that is the case, if you don't require second accesses, etc., can that be reflected through the master plan? The master plan process may be a criteria in the policy, because if there's no intention to actually encourage traffic to head north, can that actually be part of being set out within the parameters of the policy?
My colleague will never forgive me for straying into master planning points, but I'm nonetheless going to do that. There is a subtlety in the drawing here which actually derives from the planning master planning approach further towards the Newport Bagwell Road, which is a tendency, certainly in the adjacent side, which has a mission of market grant scheme as we know it. The design approach there was to effectively take the new development offline from the green. It then brings limited traffic or connectivity back onto the green. It has to adapt back. We've adopted that same approach to effectively take the development offline from the green. And what that does is present an opportunity to effectively leave the green as is, subject to minor improvements along a lot of its route, but effectively to become a route for pedestrian and cycle use, certainly on those sections where the development fronts. That offers improved connectivity, of course, but what it then does also do to the east of Preston Deanery Road is to again introduce an element of management of traffic leading further up. Those are master plan considerations rather than local plan considerations in my view. But I think these are the sort of discussions that we'd engage in moving on towards a planning application. But certainly the ability to work off the green to protect its character and thereby both serving the interest of sustainable movement and generally managing traffic flow, that is possible in the land that Homes England control and also on highway lands. That's all.
Well, I think in terms of our point of view, it is a consideration because we need to think about there's a safe and suitable access to the site as a consideration, and also would there be any significant effects that can be mitigated. And if there is any intention to significantly change the level of traffic on the green by increasing it, that is inevitably going to require work upgrading to it, which will then have consequences. But if that is not intended to happen through the plan, that then those costs don't need to be reflected through the viability, and those concerns of residents can go away. However, if it's a case of, well, actually there might be two forms of access, an access to the north or an access to the south and west, that is a different thing. So it's just really clarity on that. I think if it's not necessary to route traffic and to make changes to the green, I think it's reasonable for the local plan to reflect that as part of the criteria for the management plan. But ultimately, you're right, it would be determined through a development management process, should the plan be found sound, etc., etc. But at this stage, I think it's appropriate to set out the parameters based upon what we know at this stage and what the intentions are and what can be achieved. Because there are potential implications for infrastructure provision onto the bed of the road that we maybe don't have answers to. And those we would need to have some comfort that the site would be viable and can be achievable if those are necessary for a significant increase in traffic in the green, etc. So,
I think, sir, if I may, the principle of managing traffic North East and Green is agreed. There's no, I don't believe there's any debate about that. That's something that is of concern to Greycoat residents, and it's a point that they've made in their emerging neighbourhood development plan, which is coming through a different process, and Homes England have been supportive of that in that separate process. So in principle, that's not an issue. I think my point really is simply the level of specificity about what would be said at this point beyond that matter of principle. Because certainly, I would anticipate there would need to be some access to the north, simply because routing traffic a very long way around probably has other effects which would be undesirable.
Well, it already exists, doesn't it? There are already highway routes there, so it's not a case of no one suggesting stopping up, etc.
No, indeed. So there's a design response at the application stage. There is then a sequence of measures that could be taken and applied through the application stage, informed by principles in the policy, which would be to reduce traffic in certain directions, etc., to increase sustainable modes and so forth. So I think certainly in principle there is no difficulty with that. It's just really the level of detail that one would get to at this point.
And to achieve safe and suitable access, which includes suitable access for those residents in the village of the road.
Indeed. One brief point, it is just flagged in the drawings, but we are subject to land control, etc., seeking to provide a connection between the very north-eastern tip of the site and the village, just as you enter into the village. There is an opportunity for soft access there, which then just brings together those sites in a soft way. It has the additional benefit of making it easy for residents of the village to enter the sound should they wish to.
You speak by software, you mean providing non-vehicle modes?
Correct.
Yeah, like walking.
Yes.
Yeah. People are wondering what
Yes.
these technical terms might mean. Yeah, so there would be some connectivity between the existing village and the proposed development by way of the sang and the open space, which will be available obviously to all, because it is open space. Okay, thanks.
Thank you for that. I think we've done sufficient on traffic. It was a useful discussion. As well as the natural environment, I've touched on it earlier, the impact that the proposal might have on the historic environment of Redhaven. So could I ask the council to respond then to question 69? Does the policy set out a positive strategy for the conservation and enjoyment of the historic environment? It's useful to get that.
Yeah. In paragraph 13-14 of the submitted plan, we did provide a commentary on the outcome of the heritage impact assessment, which includes a couple of key points, which are the reference to the archaeological potential, and also that the scheme needs to be sensitive to the surrounding area. Policy 41 has been updated to reflect this. Historic England welcomed the policy changes and requested that no further changes be made to the policy in this regard. So we are confident that the policy sets out a positive strategy for the historic environment. In addition, any proposals that come forward will need to comply with policy 31 of this local plan, which provides guidance on the protection and enhancements of designated and non-designated heritage assets.
So in terms of policy 41 being updated, is that through a modification or is that between the two versions of the plan?
The bit on the heritage impact assessment, there were no further modifications because Historic England was happy with the updated policy that was written post heritage impact assessment. Yeah.
Thanks.
So they were confident that we've taken what we needed to take into account.
Thank you for that. Any comment?
Well,
what I was going to say, so is from our preliminary technical work on that and indeed on heritage, the invisibility to the village church, which is Great Oxford listed, that is primarily relates to the eastern, northeastern part of the site, which you will have seen or will see on your site visit. There's obviously a very strong topographical change in the slopes, etc. That reinforces that conclusion, and certainly we're alert to the importance of managing heritage impacts, hence the early commission on this work to understand the constraints coming into this examination, and certainly the requirements as a practitioner, the requirements of the policy are very clear in terms of what we need to do. We would in any case need to go through an EIA screening and a scoping process that was following in due course, obviously subject to due process, etc. And so there is at that stage an opportunity to understand exactly the level of constraint and to ensure that proper methodologies, etc. For any such application and indeed detail of master planning at that stage.
Thanks for that. Councillors?
No.
I want to move on to the landscape, the landscape vision. Again, read the stuff that's coming around this. The first question, I suppose, I'll start with the council. Is it appropriate to leave the landscape vision for the master planning process? And the question I have is, what guides the development of the master plan in terms of principles?
If I can just explain that figure 20 was initially prepared to confirm the need for a buffer between the development site and Great Houghton. So it is clear as to where built development should not be acceptable. It was meant to also provide guidelines in terms of where highway improvements are expected to be delivered. The council does accept that further guidance on ecological enhancements and vision should be provided, so we are proposing a modification to policy 41, which is modification 42A, which will give more guidance on figure 20. With regards to the vision, we accept that the plan does not currently specify a specific design and landscape vision, because we consider that this would be best developed through the master planning exercise that is evolving. And we note the concept plan that's been submitted in the hearing statement, and that is welcomed. So to ensure that the master planning exercise is undertaken, the council is also proposing a modification to policy 41, which is modification 45A to that effect.
And so therefore, in terms of what guides the master plan, it's the modifications that have been made to policy 41, which gives
yes,
more
it gives
guidance.
additional guidance, yes.
Yeah. England.
Yeah, just as far as the master plan, the main modification 45A, policy 41, we're giving some further thought to, because the council intended with the proposed modification is that the master plan would accompany the planning application following on the process of consultation at a local level, rather than requiring a separate master plan in advance of a planning application. And at the moment, the proposed modification would seem to suggest that it does require a separate stage, so we're just going to revisit that.
Okay. I think the point I was getting at was to just make sure the policy is effective, being able to guide that master plan, and not to reproduce the master plan in the policy.
Yes, that's helpful.
Just as a point of clarity, is it the intention that the potential developer prepares the master plan?
Yes.
Rather than the council? Okay, that's clear. So I think the plan, to be clear about that, and is the council giving any further thought to what the master plan should contain. Now, I'm imagining that's actually most of the different criteria in the policy, so it might be a case of how the policy structured, but the master plan shall be prepared that considers whichever point it needs to consider, so that and that will be submitted with the application. Then the council can set the parameters that it wants to guide the development, and then the master plan can be prepared and submitted as a master plan, parameters plan, along with an application. Imagining that's probably how it would work.
It does work like that, and
It
certainly
normally does in section 78 and 5.
I mean, obviously, Homes England, given the nature of the organisation, will engage. It is required to uphold government guidance, building beautiful and all manner of other elements, and certainly today, the collaboration with the council and with that is intended to continue, and that might be typically, say, through a pre-application process. But certainly, the principles which are identified in your questions are matters that we would normally address through a master planning process. But I can understand your concern to ensure that they are.
Well, their points coming through the policy, I think, that need to be captured within the master plan, because that is the council's intention in its plan. The other point, I think, in terms of effectiveness, would be the master plan would apply to the whole of the site, because it may be, when the site is disposed of, it will be to a number of different developers.
Indeed.
And so the broad parameters and the contributions towards the site would need to be collected from the whole of that development, and to then be apportioned through whatever agreements you have. But I think that would be an important consideration in terms of its effectiveness, to ensure that the vision that would be set out in the plan, if we could find it sound, would be the guiding vision that would be delivered, as opposed to phase one and a change of mind.
Indeed. In practical terms, the approach, given that site is in one ownership and the approach that Homes England intend to take, those concerns we don't anticipate would be realised, and understand the reason to seek to protect against them. I think subject to detailed wording, setting out the principles that the master plan should address is very reasonable. There are, of course, safeguards in any planning application process to require, certainly given the engagement of Natural England, to ensure that, for example, the sound performs the function it must do, and the planning application process does deal with that. Usually it works pretty well at doing that, sometimes it doesn't. So I think it's a matter of setting out those principles so that we're clear, and those are things that can then be reflected in a planning application.
That was a point I was trying to make earlier, and just to pick up the point about the sound, the master plan obviously will be wider than the sound, because you mentioned earlier about the relationship between the site and the conservation area and the Grade 2 listed church, and some of those sort of principles need to be obviously picked up in the master plan. So I'm not suggesting those should be detailed to that sort of level in the policy, but I'm using that as a way of illustrating some of the master planning principles that perhaps should be picked up in the policy.
We'll give some thought to that, so we'll see whether or not we can build in the principle about sensitivity in terms of how you treat the green place of the Great Basin as well. Yeah. So we'll pick up that point at the same time.
I can move on now to a matter around sustainable urban drainage. The question 71, would the policy be effective in respect of the provision of sustainable urban drainage systems? And this is sewage system, again, quite forward or something.
Yeah. We will be using policy 7, which is on flood risk and water management, which is also being proposed for modification, and that will be modification 3A.
So
I was just rereading our submission, and we referenced that policy 7 was in our view the appropriate way to deal with that.
Okay, thank you.
There's also a strategic policy BN7A in the Joint Core Strategy as well. Addresses that.
Question 72, we've explored a lot of issues related to the deliverability and developability of the site. But are there any other reasons why the proposed allocation should not be considered as deliverable or developable as part of the framework definitions?
No, we have not identified any reason why the site would not be deliverable or developable.
And the work that Housing has commissioned is now taken. Part of the purpose of that was to understand the constraints of the site to ensure that any abnormal elements would be identified early. Just to explain the process going forward, the benefit of Homes England's engagement at this point and their intention is to prepare this to secure outline planning permission subject to process, and then to dispose. And what that does is it allows the market to price in the certainty of the planning permission and the obligations that run with it. So that provides a more certain process, and of course Homes England, given their content, the nature of their organisation, the ambition is there to make sites deliverable. That's their remit. So there is comfort on that stuff.
Thank you. Question 73. I think I might know the answer to this one, but there are some contradictory pointers in the evidence that I've seen around the trajectory and the rate of delivery from the site. So, for instance, in Homes England's evidence, there's some tables which show the site delivering in this financial year, and certainly in some of the tables I've seen, and there's comments that it's deliverable now, whereas the table I've seen that's attached to the council's modifications, for instance, shows delivery very much in the later parts of the plan period and perhaps going outside the plan period. So I can start with the council. In terms of the trajectory of the delivery of this site, when do you foresee starting to deliver houses?
The delivery is expected to take place towards the latter part of the plan period, and this has been confirmed in the statement of common ground that's been signed between the council and Homes England, and that is exam 31. And it is expected that this will allow time for the additional bird survey to be undertaken.
And that's consistent with what's at the back of the table of modifications, the latest one that we have. That's the coloured document.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to explain, if I may, so the background to the statement of common ground, we did look in detail at the plan process, so we'd assumed the adoption in March, so we provided time for that process. The trajectory that we prepared also took account of the outline application time process, the disposal process that Homes England would have to follow, and the preparation of reserve matters and so forth. So our position is aligned with the council. In fact, it's our trajectory, if you like, to some extent, and it takes account of the processes that Homes England has to go, so we have high confidence in that trajectory.
I think it's, in terms of that document, it's about 2027 that it starts delivering.
26,
It's
27.
2026-27.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. And then finally, the proposed modifications, we've been picking them up as we've gone through. It would be useful if the council could just go through the proposed modifications that for this and just comment on how they're necessary for soundness.
They are necessary because we believe that they will make the policy more effective. And we'll begin with modification 38, which reflects the comments received from Anglian Water, which reflects the requirements Modification 40 reflects the comments received from Natural England for clarification purposes. Modification 41 reflects the comments received from Natural England and the former Northamptonshire County Council. And this will strengthen the policy as well as make it more effective. modification 42 also reflects the comments received from the former Northamptonshire County Council. Modification 43 again reflects the comments received from Anglo Water. And the same with modification 44. Modification 45 reflects the comments from Natural England and Homes England, which commits Homes England to delivering a sign. And modification 45A commits to the preparation of a master plan.
Is 39A modification as well that's proposed in relation to
Sorry, 39A. Yes, it is, yes.
Paragraph 1312 of the plan, so it's a textual change. To refer effectively to it, will refer to the revised policy and the buffer.
So is that 42A?
No, 39A.
Oh,
It's
sorry.
42A as well.
That's 42.
There's more.
Oh,
Things have moved on
yes,
slightly.
39A effectively provides the text of what is 42A. If that's any less confusing.
That was all Mr.
was that the point you were going to make?
42A, yes.
I've come to the end of the. Sorry,
If I may, excuse me, sorry sir. There's 39B as well, which is the amendment to the boundary to accommodate Harlington Lodge.
Oh, yes.
That we discussed earlier. Just there is that. Just to confirm our view is that those changes are reasonable and necessary, and obviously subject to the discussion that we will have on 45A.
thank you, sir. Thank you for that. That brings me to the end of the questions that I have on this matter.
Can I just add that, yes, there will be some changes to the list that we've submitted, and we will be reissuing the proposed main modifications with the updated, any updates we will be posting on the website.
Yeah, that will pick up the
So
same.
we have
I think at the moment it's probably, if you can keep a running list,
Yes, a running
rather
list
than
of the
publish them
changes.
on the website at the moment, you've provided those that we discussed at the hearings.
Yeah.
From this point on, they become work in progress between ourselves and the council.
Yeah.
And so there's little benefit in publishing them on the website because they're liable to change.
Okay.
And so it just gives like version control. So
Okay.
if we keep the note of the actions, which will come on say we can then review tomorrow, if they're likely to be ready, I would suggest at the end of the session, because given the number of participants, it's probably somewhat fewer than we were anticipating. It might be a similar day in terms of the length of the programme. And so even if you have to adjourn for a bit and come back later in the afternoon for you just to complete the list, that would be quite handy to do tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, we can do that. We're keeping the running list at the
Yeah.
end of each day, so we'll have it ready for tomorrow. So that's helpful to have that guidance. So we'll keep any changes which come forward through the examination process separate to those which have already been published.
Yes, and then we will confirm in our advisory letter, obviously depending on our overall conclusions, the need for main modifications. We're discussing them in the sessions, and so main modifications, if we decide the plan can be made sound, will be formed based upon those discussed in the hearing sessions and those submitted by the council. That's our starting point. And then it becomes an iterative process between ourselves, assuming that the plan is found sound, and then the final version of the consultation is then eventually met, subject to you talking to statutory consultees, undertaking habitats regulation assessments, sustainability appraisal, etc. Yeah, and taking account of things like potential boundary changes to sites, such as with the site we've been discussing, and of course the policies maps changes you would need to publish separately, but alongside everything else, because if they're not before us, they are of interest to us.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I don't think there's anything else to say this afternoon. I think there's no more Toblerones being raised. So can I thank everybody for their participation this afternoon. The session is now, the hearing is now adjourned, and wish everybody a safe trip home. Thank you.
Thank you.